All right, we're going to start by going over the review questions. The first one, actually, we had this other graph. And the question is, which of the following statements about the firm whose cost and revenue curves are shown here are correct? Out of these 5 answers, only one of them is true. Hopefully you remembered what's the very first thing that you do with any of these graphs?
MR equals MC.
MR equals MC, or MC equals MR. Right, okay? So sure enough, here's our marginal revenue curve. Here's our marginal cost curve, and they intersect right here. And that tells you what?
It's maximum profit?
Well, that's the place where we will get the maximum profit. Which axis do we look at once we find that intersecting place? The X or the Y?
The Y.
The X.
Oh,
Okay.
onward.
Isn't that great that this is now on recording?
Great.
We look down here, it tells us the profit maximizing quantity, okay? So here's the intersection. So we know that this firm, to maximize their profit, they're going to be producing at 200 units. What price is this company going to be charging?
$5.
No.
Wait. No, $20.
We're going to go up to the demand curve. Because remember, what is the demand curve? It's the combination of all the prices and quantities for whatever they produce. So if the quantity, if the X value on the demand curve is 200 right there, then we know that the Y value, the price, is going to be $20. So now that we've remembered the first thing we need to do to attack this, which of those 5 statements is the only one that could be true?
C, maximum profit of $4,000.
Agreed?
Oh no, I was gonna say B.
Which one?
I was gonna say B.
B? Okay. The profit maximizing output level is 200 units, and that is true. So it is actually B. Yeah. This first thing we do with MR equals MC, we go down here. Oh yes, it's 200. The profit maximizing price is not 5 because that's not a price. We go up to the demand curve. The price is 20. That's what's wrong with letter A. C, the maximum profit is 4,000. At 200 units times $20 per unit, that is 4,000, but that's not the profit. That's only the total revenue
Okay.
for that. To calculate the profit, how do we calculate the profit here? If this is the total profit is equal to revenue minus
What you spend.
cost, what you spent. And which curve here tells us about your costs?
The ATC.
The ATC, the average total cost. Right. So at this quantity of 200, the average total cost for each unit is 10. So on average, each of those 200 units cost you $10 to make, and you sold them for $20 each, so the profit for each unit is
15. Wait, no, 10.
10.
Yeah.
$10. We sold it for 20, the actual cost for each unit was 10, 20 minus 10 is 10. So the actual maximum profit is going to be $2,000, which is half of the revenue. D, if it produces 250 units, it will earn no economic profits. The problem, remember, economic profit is this. This is economic profit. It's extra profit over and above your normal profit, your normal. As long as there's a distance between average total cost at this quantity and where your demand curve is, that quantity, there is profit. Once the distance here is eliminated, if average total cost went through right there, there would be no economic profit. But there would still be that normal profit, your salary, your benefits, whatever you get out of being your own boss, you know, that kind of stuff. So that's the problem with D. And E, the total cost is 1,000, that's completely off. All right. Any other questions about this?
So profit is MC minus ATC.
Profit is the selling price per unit minus the ATC at that quantity.
Oh, okay.
It's this distance right here. And we learned last time that that exists in only the short run. That exists in pure competition and in monopolistic competition only in the short run. In the long run, things happen. You know, this right here is probably a great example of monopolistic competition. It could even be monopoly. But in the long run, the demand curve and the average total cost and MRMC, they're all going to equal, they're all going to intersect basically and eliminate that economic profit. All right, 2 and 3, we're going to take a look at the other graph. We've got our marginal cost, we've got ATC, and then they've thrown in here the average variable cost as well. I wonder why they did that. CF, this distance right here, what does that represent?
C.
C.
C is correct, average fixed cost, because your total cost consists of just 2 types of costs. Your variable is the distance from here to here, and then the rest must be fixed. Very good. And then 3, if marginal revenue is equal to P1, this Y value, all the following statements are true except
D.
D.
P1 right here. There's no distance between the price, which is the marginal revenue, because it's the price is whatever the revenue you get for that selling that next unit, and then the average total cost is exactly there, and that is correct. Very good. Had this ATC curve been any lower, there would have been a distance there between this curve and this value on the graph, and there would be economic profit, but there isn't.
So normal means no profit?
Normal means no extra over and above, like decadent, no, not decadent, I looked at my donut and said decadent. There's no bonus extra profit. A normal profit means that there's still enough money to cover your benefits, your salary, which may be a hefty salary if it's built into your cost structure that way, you know, that's normal profit. Moving along, we get to number 4. I'll probably edit this part out. Which of the following statements is true for a monopolist at the profit maximizing output level?
A.
A is correct. Price exceeds the marginal revenue. Monopolists can identify its maximum price, and it can set it much higher than marginal revenue. 5, monopolies are inefficient compared to perfectly competitive firms because monopolies D, charge a price greater than the marginal cost. C, which means they have an economic profit in the long run in perfectly competitive firms and markets, there is no economic profit. 6, which of the following statements is true for a perfectly competitive firm but not true for monopoly?
E.
E?
E.
Oh, B. B. Good, B is correct. Remember, in a perfectly competitive market, the firms are price takers. In monopoly, you're the price maker. You have to accept the market price for the good because you're such a small fish and your product is not any better than anybody else's product. You can't control that market price. All right, 7. If we took a perfectly competitive industry and we monopolized it, and we didn't change any of the cost or anything, the price and quantity produced would change in which of the following ways?
C.
The answer is B. You are correct in identifying that the price would be jacked up. However, the quantity would likely decrease because chances are wherever that MR equals MC is for the monopoly, we would have less quantity. I think in pure competition, you end up producing at the low point, yeah, that's right, the low point of the average total cost curve, but that's not true for monopoly. Let's see if I can pull this up here. So in pure competition or perfect competition, where MR equals MC right here, in the long run, you're going to end up in this place right here, which is also the minimum for the average total cost curve. And that represents full efficiency. One of the critiques and likely a question that you'll get somewhere on the test, whether it's free response or multiple choice, is do monopolies operate at the minimum of the average total cost curve? And the answer is no.
But perfect long does.
But perfect does, yes.
So why does it, the quantity decrease? I still don't understand that.
I think it's related to this part right here. If this were the kind of the structure, the situation with pure competition, again, you'd expect to have your, in the long run, your MR equals MC would be right here at the minimum of the average total cost curve, which means your quantity, ceteris paribus, everything else is set up here, would be right here. Obviously, for this situation, they're going to be producing right here, and that represents a decrease. Because the minimum, the minimum of the ATC and monopoly is always going to have a greater X value than where they're ending up producing, where MR equals MC. It just is, the way that it's set up. The way, the shape of the average total cost curve, the shape of all these curves means that where this minimum of this curve is always going to be out here further to the right. It just is. Because monopolies are not efficient. They don't produce at huge quantities. They don't need to. They're getting their profit not by expanding production, output. They're making their profit because they can do so much to raise the price of its product. So it's going to go up that way, not out this way, which means we're probably going to mean less quantity than society would prefer. The most efficient place for the monopoly to produce, best for society, the way that pure competition would work, once again, is right here at the minimum of the average total cost curve, so that every unit is produced most efficiently, the lowest possible cost. But that's not where the monopoly is going to be producing. Instead, MR equals MC is right here at a quantity down here 300, which means that we're going to reduce the overall output, and 1/3 of the people who might want this product, they're not getting it.
Okay, so perfect would be at the lowest of that ATC
Yes.
but monopoly would be at that MR equals MC.
Yeah, and still, in every one, it's MR equals MC, don't get me wrong. It's just, if this was perfect, MR equals MC would also intersect with the minimum of the average total cost curve. Let me see if I have a picture of that. Not really. I don't have that with me, but that is true. Okay. Set down my answers. Well, number 8, in a perfectly competitive industry, the market price is $12. Imagine that a firm produces at a level output where the average total cost is $6, marginal cost is 16, and average variable cost is 8. To maximize its profit, what should this firm do?
Shut down.
And what are you basing that answer on?
Well, the variable cost is higher than the total cost. I don't see how that's possible.
Yes. For average total cost.
Yeah,
Okay, okay.
I don't even see how that's possible at all. Because average total cost is supposed to be average variable cost with average fixed cost.
Mhm. I never noticed that before. But let's eliminate that, or let's maybe that average total cost should be $26 or something like that. Now what? What's the formula that we use to calculate whether it should shut down or not?
I don't remember.
Okay, we're comparing two of those variables.
Well, you emphasized marginal cost when you said it, so I'm guessing that's too high, because it exceeds market price.
That's a good point, yeah, yeah. The formula is, I hope I had it up while I wanted it. Shutdown is when the price is less than average variable cost. If you are at the quantity that the company is producing at, that's the profit maximization quantity, and at that point the price is less than average variable cost. Remember, that's when you're adding insult to injury, you're making yourself worse off by producing because you're adding average variable costs that aren't even covering the price to sell each unit. So
it's not D. And shouldn't shut down?
it's not shut down, actually.
Oh, well, gosh, you're leading me in the wrong direction.
Yep.
How about E? Is it E?
Let me see if I can. Here's the key basic thing. Oh, but this doesn't have a return, but still, we can use this one. So we have where on the graph, where on this graph, even though this doesn't have the same numbers that we're looking at here, where on this graph do we see that the marginal cost is greater than the average total cost. Which part of the graph show is where the MC is greater than the ATC?
To the right,
Okay. Every point passed right here, right?
right.
Okay? And in this, so we know we're somewhere out here. That's the bad news. The bad news is you don't want to be out there, because every time you make another unit, you're adding more cost than the price probably. You're on the really high sloping area of adding costs into your production. So which way do we generally want to go? Left, right. We want to move, because the way that this is set up and the way the slope of the line, we want to move ourselves until we know that we're somewhere right of this magic perfect place that we want to be. So if you move left, eventually you're going to find the MR equals MC point. We don't know what the other curves will look like at that point, but the key thing is that we know that we're out here and we want to reduce our output to get to that point. So that means that the answer is letter C. Why and how do we know that they should keep producing and not shut down? Because the market price is 12, but the average variable cost is 8. The average variable cost is less than the market price, so we don't shut down. But we are too high for our output, so we do need to move left until we get to that point.
So how would I know that without looking at a graph?
I guess two things. Number one is, again, should you shut down, you have to apply the comparison of price to average variable cost. Because if the price is less than average variable cost, you do shut down. But that wasn't true for this situation,
So
right?
average variable cost is everything you put into the cost of making something.
Well, except for the fixed costs. Yeah. So, if this is pizzas, to make that, the average pizzas out there, whatever this output level is, it costs $8 for all of the ingredients, all the electricity, that kind of stuff.
Okay.
But doesn't count rent, doesn't count, the payment on the car, delivery car, things like that. So that's number one. So now we know that we don't want to shut down because the price is more than covering our average variable costs. The second thing is, okay, but we know that we're not in the best place we want to be, because market price is also marginal revenue. Because if you're selling a pizza or whatever this is, for 90 cents, every single pizza is 90 cents, so it's a horizontal line. It doesn't matter if it's the first pizza you sell or 1,000th or 15,000th, the marginal revenue for that pizza is going to be 90 cents.
Marginal or market price is the same as marginal revenue?
Yep. For perfect competition. Because it doesn't matter because you can't change the price. You're stuck taking the price in the market. Okay. So if the market price is also marginal revenue, that's 12, and marginal cost is 16, MC is greater than MR. So now we know we're not even in this area right here. We have a situation where your MC is greater than your MR, and your price is higher than your average variable cost, and we know that marginal cost is up there. So we're somewhere in this segment of the line right here, actually. So we definitely want to reduce our output.
So due to marginal costs being more than marginal revenue, right?
Yep. Yep. So that tells you. So you should, even if you're not given this graph, which we're not on this problem, you should have a general understanding and maybe have this in your head somehow of how the curves behave here.
Because since the marginal cost is more than the market price, that means you're not making a profit, right?
Correct.
Okay, got
take VF in
Form
Form
two.
2.
It's towards the beginning. Right here. Okay, and then the last one, when a perfectly competitive firm sells additional units of output, what happens to total revenue?
C.
No.
D.
Remember I said this was an example of perfect competition?
Right.
As as output is increasing, as quantity is increasing, what's happening to that?
Remains constant?
It remains constant.
Got
Right.
it.
Because every time you sell that next pizza, you're making the same amount of extra revenue. That's not true necessarily for some of the other markets, but for pure competition it is.
Okay.
Okay. Do you have a few more minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, okay. So we're gonna go ahead, we need to touch on the very last type of market structure, and that's the oligopoly. Do you remember how is an oligopoly different from the other three?
Maybe I would say it has less competitors than a perfect competition arena. And more competitors than a monopoly? Is it in between the two then?
Yep, it's between monopolistic competition and monopoly. So it's ruled by a few, the market is ruled just by a few major companies.
Yeah.
You know, like the soda industry, like the airline industry, the car industry. There are some minor, people can tinker in their garage, or there's, Jolly Good and some other small soda manufacturers, but, it's dominated by just a few firms. Now, first of all, there's something called a balanced oligopoly. Nope. And an unbalanced oligopoly.
Can I get donut?
You didn't have one yet?
No, I
Oh, sure. In a balanced oligopoly, you've got four firms out of maybe 8 major ones that dominate the market, but none of them is the superstar, the godfather, etc. If this is airlines, like this might be United, and this might be Delta, this might be American, and this might be Southwest or something like that. There are other airlines you can fly, but these are the main 4, and they're fairly close together. In an unbalanced oligopoly, there is a godfather. There is a dominant company that dominates the market. In this case, it's 50% just one company. And this is somewhat important because it's going to talk about, again, the amount of competition that is going to take place within that market. This might be internet browsers. Company 1 might be Microsoft Internet Explorer. Let's say that 50% of all internet browsers used in America are Internet Explorer, and then you might have like Netscape Navigator or Firefox or Chrome or whatever. They have a much smaller piece of the pie, but they're all looking to that one big company that kind of dominates the market. So balanced versus unbalanced. Some people fear that America is, and other countries, are becoming more oligopolistic. We're becoming more dominated by just a few big companies. We talk about Walmart, we talk about big companies that dominate industries. This looks at one of the reasons for that, the increase in mergers. And we had great deregulation and allowing for more mergers, more consolidation of industry, starting in the 70s, and especially around this time right here, early 80s, Ronald Reagan, the Republican Revolution, they deregulated airlines, they deregulated trucking, banking, all these, to try to create more competition. Green Bay, our airport, Austin Straubel Field, we used to have just one airline called North Central Airlines, I think it was, that served us. And it was set that way by the government basically to ensure at least we had one. But then when they deregulated, now North Central had to compete against all other airlines, and we do have a few now in Green Bay, other ones. But in the same token, we have many fewer total airlines in the United States. And this has continued certainly on through the 20 years after that. What's the problem with mergers? Well, the more and more consolidation, the fewer firms that dominate the market, you tend to have a price that goes up, an equilibrium price, and you get almost near monopoly conditions. You don't need to know this four-firm concentration ratio, but what that is a formula. The higher this formula is, the more it is dominated by a few firms. So as you get more domination by fewer firms, you can see here that you tend to get higher price on average for whatever it is that you sell. And you start to get prices that approach monopoly levels. Because as we'll see, sometimes we have companies in oligopoly that will work together. They'll try to fix prices because it benefits all of them. And in reality, then in a way, it's almost like it's not even an oligopoly. It's because they're all working in on it together. It's almost like they are a monopoly. All right. There's two then possible situations for oligopoly. The first one is when you tend to have an unbalanced oligopoly, one that's dominated by one company. The example here is chocolate industry. Imagine that D is the demand curve for all chocolate. DH is the demand for Hershey's chocolate. And Hershey's is the godfather of chocolate. And Hershey's controls 1/4 of all, in this example, 1/4 of all of the chocolate sales, revenue, demand, whatever, in society. So here's the marginal cost curve for the entire industry, and then MCH is just Hershey's marginal cost curve, and then MRH is going to be Hershey's marginal revenue. So what happens in Godfather is everybody watches the Godfather to see what they do. And then they just follow suit because they're such a dominant company. In the Godfather, they all watch to see what they do. And then they follow suit. And that includes prices. So what happens is Hershey's, they kind of get to set the market price for chocolate. They make the decision because they're so dominant. So we, once again, MR equals MC, just like everything else. We look for MR equals MC, and they intersect for Hershey's right here. So we know that Hershey's is going to want to maximize its profit by producing 5 tons of chocolate. And then, like we do with monopolistic competition and monopoly, we go up to the demand curve, and this tells us what they will be able to charge when they produce 5 tons. It's going to be $5 a ton. So if they are the godfather, the entire market is going to wait to see what they do. And now we see that Hershey's has decided to produce 5 tons of chocolate at $5. Well, that's what the rest of the market's going to do. They're going to also play along, and we're going to go with this $5 price for a ton of chocolate. For the industry, the entire industry with this demand curve, at $5 a ton, we know that they're going to produce, or they're going to be able to sell 20 tons of chocolate. The 15 represents the other firms in the market. The 20 is the total. The 5 is Hershey's. 5 plus the 15 for everybody else equals the 20. Questions? Pretty straightforward. You look at you in the Godfather oligopoly, figure out the Godfather, what they're going to do, and then just see what that means for the demand curve for the entire industry. There's another kind of weird factor, you may or may not run into it, you might, is the idea, some economists say that an oligopoly actually has a kinked demand curve like this. And this is going to lead us to another important element of an oligopoly, because they do watch each other very closely. There are two different demand curves here. The demand curve YY is the demand curve for a company that, where the other companies, let me make sure I say this right. Demand curve YY is if all of the other firms copy this company. The example here is, let's do Hershey's again. No, we can't because we use, that's a Godfather oligopoly. The example in the book here is Lipton iced tea, so this is iced tea. If all the other iced tea companies raise their price and lower their price along with Lipton, then the demand curve for Lipton will be YY. It's going to be relatively inelastic. As long as when you raise your price, everybody else raises their price, your demand for your product isn't going to change that much, right? Yes, fewer people buy iced tea at higher prices because of the law of demand, but you're not going to lose, like because of the substitution effect, you're not going to lose customers to other iced teas because they also raise their price. If you lower your price, yes, your quantity demanded will increase some because more people will buy it at a lower price, but you're not able to steal customers from the other iced tea companies because they also lowered their price. So YY shows a very inelastic demand curve for Lipton if companies follow suit with what Lipton does. But if we have a different situation where companies choose not to raise and lower its prices with Lipton because this is not a Godfather, Lipton's not a Godfather like we saw with Hershey's, then Lipton's curve is going to be NN. Because now, even a small increase in price from this level up to there, we see a big drop-off in the quantity demanded for Lipton because nobody else raised their prices. So now we combine the fact when Lipton raises its price that A, at a higher price, people are going to demand less Lipton, and B, people will switch from Lipton to other iced teas, right? Now, so it's a much more elastic, a flatter demand curve. What happens if Lipton were to lower its price a little bit from its 80-cent level and nobody else does? Now now we kick in a big elastic change on the increase because now you're going to be able to have more quantity demanded because you have a lower price, but also because you're going to be stealing customers away from other firms. They didn't lower the price, you did, you're going to steal for your substitutes. So, inelastic curve YY if firms do change their prices along with Lipton. Elastic demand curve NN if firms do not copy Lipton's price changes. Here's where we get the kink. Here's where we learn something about oligopolistic behavior. Imagine that you're Lipton. No, imagine that you're Lipton's competitor. How about? Imagine that who else makes iced tea? Country Time? Well, imagine that you're Country Time, like they make lemonade, but let's say they make iced tea. I don't know. No, it's Erica's iced tea. Lipton, you read in the news, Lipton is raising their price. And you're like, wow, that's surprising. I thought we were rolling along pretty well, both of us offering our tea for 80 cents a unit, whatever. Your costs remain the same. Would you also raise your price?
Yeah.
What would happen if you didn't raise your price? you're a competitor of Lipton's?
Oh wait, hang on. Would I want to raise my price? Well, if I did raise the price, then no, I wouldn't want to raise the price because I think I would lose people. I think I would lose customers.
Okay, but Lipton raised their price. What could you do if you didn't raise your price? What would happen?
If I didn't raise
If you
my
did not.
price, if I didn't raise my price, well, I may not make as much revenue, but
Sure you will. You'll make just as much as before per unit, but you're gonna steal some of Lipton's customers because they raised their price and you didn't. So your price now is relatively cheaper compared to Lipton.
isn't that what I said before?
I don't know.
Okay.
So
I wouldn't want to raise my price.
no, you wouldn't.
Okay.
Now, if Lipton raised its price because of a increase in input costs, and like for sugar, and you also face that same sugar, you probably would feel compelled
Right.
to raise your price. But if they rose it because their workers that now are paid more, and that doesn't apply to your workers, you didn't give your people a raise, then now you can keep it there and steal there. So Lipton, in this case, this part right here does apply to Lipton. Lipton will try hard to not raise their price, but if they do, they will be faced with this situation because you, their competitor, will not raise your price if you can. So for Lipton, this segment of their demand curve is due to the fact that if they do raise their price, they're probably going to be stuck losing a lot of customers because their competitors, like Erica's Iced Tea, are not going to raise their price. Now, if you're Eric's Iced Tea and you read that Lipton is lowering its price, what are you probably going to do? Because?
Because otherwise people are going to go and get cheaper.
Yeah, Lipton's going to steal your customers in that case. So when price falls, you are probably going to follow suit because you're afraid to lose your customers. So now we're looking at this YY demand curve that represented what if the two companies do mimic each other. And that is why we have this kinked demand curve. Lipton faces NK, that portion right there, if they do raise their price, but if they lower the price, they're faced with a slope like this KY. Oligopolies behave this way. They have sticky prices. You know, think about Coke, Pepsi. I think about, to a lesser extent, cars and airplanes. They don't change the price of their products very often. And part of that is because their behavior is interconnected, is interchanged. And they just as soon all keep their prices together and relatively high as well. They could use illegal means or legal means to do that, I suppose. But so this is why we have the kinked demand curve. Different behavior from the firms when you raise price versus lower price. Questions?
Wait, what's NK? NK is when Lipton does what?
And well, because NK has Y values that are all greater than the previous price, that shows their demand curve should they raise their price from previous. So if they raise their price from 80 cents, it'll show a quick drop off in your X, your output, because other companies are stealing their customers. KY shows that at prices lower than 80 cents, there will be an increase, but a much less of a slope, less of a elastic effect, because other companies have also lowered their prices and you can't really steal them as easily. I'll show you this real quick. Now, the MR curve, the marginal revenue, is different. When you have two different slopes, basically you have two segments of this demand curve for your oligopoly, like we have there for Lipton, we have here, you're going to have actually two marginal revenue curves. I mean, they're basically parallel, but you have this little gap here because of how different the behavior is with prices that are greater or less than. all you need to know is that because of this gap, it helps us to understand again why prices tend to be sticky, tend to not change very much in oligopoly. Because even if your cost, your sugar, whatever they do change, this marginal cost curve can fluctuate, can move up or down anywhere between that gap and still have MR equals MC. Anywhere between this price and this price, you know, that cost, that marginal cost level is still technically MR equals MC and would not change the quantity, wouldn't change the price, it wouldn't change any behavior here whatsoever. You still would have the demand curve, this quantity here hitting at K, which tells us the price that would be offered. You would have to have a significant increase in costs so that, like right up here finally the marginal cost would intersect with marginal revenue at a very high situation, and then now this company would choose, okay, we've got to make a change because of our high cost. We're going to drop our profit maximizing quantity to 2,000 and now charge 90 cents because that's where it hits the demand curve up there. And finally, one more oligopoly situation. And this one actually, again, is going to where we're going to be mimicking monopoly. It's called a cartel. Have you heard of a cartel?
Oh, heard of it once or twice.
Okay. Drug cartel, usually, right? And the reason it's called a drug cartel is it's basically, it tries to monopolize the drug production and distribution and sales in a certain area, but they're not the only company industry to do this. I just read in National Geographic, I think it was, about the drug wars that they're having in Mexico right now. And you know, it's very important that they keep their turf and that they don't allow some of the rival gangs. Towards the end of our human geography, you probably saw the map that showed where the different drug cartels are in Mexico. Anyway, I'm not going to use drugs as an example. I'm going to use oil, a different drug that we're addicted to in this country. What happens if all of the oil producing countries, companies, try to work together and influence the price? And again, what price that they all want to share in this nice, higher than otherwise would be happening price. Here is the entire market. Notice the large quantities, let's say that's barrels of oil in an hour or a day or something like that. We'll just say day, even though it's probably way too small. Same thing as always. If we want to know oil producers and where they're going to produce, MR equals MC. Is where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. That tells us that the overall quantity in the market will be 14,000. We go up to the demand curve to see what the price will be at that quantity, $8. Completely unrealistic for oil. Let's say it's a cup of oil, or I don't know, something like that. I guess that would be a couple of gallons of oil. I don't know. Now, in a cartel, you have to make sure that all of the countries stay in line and don't mess this up. You're going to tell each, if this is the 14,000 barrels that we need produced, they have to make sure that they don't go over that 14,000 barrels. What happens if they would produce 28,000 barrels? What would go wrong? If you increase your supply quite a bit, we shift our supply curve out to the right basically, what happens that they wouldn't like?
Price would go down?
Price would go down, absolutely. If they want to keep that artificial price, they have to make sure that they don't overproduce. So they have to keep everyone in line. So, can you think of an oil cartel? There's a famous one.
Like gas station names?
No, like the oil producing countries, they belong to an organization. Well, that's the big one. It rhymes with GOPEC.
OPEC.
OPEC, right. So this is OPEC, and they're gonna tell each country how many barrels of oil that they can produce, and let's say we're Kuwait. So now over here, this panel B is looking at, okay, what's the situation in one member country? We'll say it's Kuwait. Out of the 14,000 total barrels, they decide to assign 2,000 barrels to Kuwait. So 1/7 of all the production is going to come out of Kuwait. And Kuwait, you got to be cool with this. You got to make sure that you do this, because if you produce too much, then that will affect world oil prices, and we all lose. And Kuwait's like, okay, yes, we got it. So we look at their situation at 2,000. Average total cost per barrel is 2. We go up to the price that we're getting over here, which is 8. So $6 profit per barrel. Pretty awesome. And so total revenue will be 2,000 times 8, or 16,000. The cost is just 2 times 2. Pretty nice profit right there. So hopefully Kuwait will be happy.